Hey folks, welcome back to the show. Today we're going to be shipping up to Boston to talk about the pharmaceutical community that's there and some of the main themes that are being discussed at the upcoming Boston chapter Pharmaceutical Symposium. The healthcare industry has a large number of components, of which pharmaceuticals is just one, but it's very large and there's a lot of people doing a lot of different areas. And it's very interesting to see the professional discussion in pharmaceutical statistics expand as technologies increase and there are more options for these large and small companies to get involved with more and more facets of improving people's lives through technology. So today we have pretty fun, we have some great guests. We have Weidong Zhang and Wenting Cheng, and they will be introducing themselves in a second. But this is the first part of a series on some of these biopharmaceutical issues. So if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, and then you'll hear when the next part in the series comes out. So we'll quickly jump to our intro jingle, and then we'll hear from our guests. Great. So, Weidong, let's start with you. Maybe you could, Weidong is actually just calling in right now. So you only hear his audio. But Weidong, could you maybe give us a little bit of a background about what your professional work is? And then once you both introduce yourselves, we'll then talk about what your involvement with the Boston chapter ASA is.
Sure. Thank you, Glenn, for the introduction. My name is Weidong Zhang. Currently, I work for Jounce Therapeutics, which is a startup focusing on immunotherapy drug development in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So at Jounce, I oversee a biostatistics and programming group. Mostly, this is Jounce Therapeutics is a clinical stage company. We have a couple of phase 2 and phase 1 trials. My group is mostly focusing on supporting the design and programming activities across different programs here. What I see here at the biotech pharmaceutical companies, what's challenging is, you have multiple programs at the ongoing, but, we are supporting activities covering from clinical readout, publications, business development. So, which is nice because, you basically have a team that covering the whole spectrum of the clinical development in these small companies. So we are in the stage of a fast-moving technology in this pharmaceutical industry because of in this area is really competitive. Every company is moving the program really fast. So, my work at the company is really fast-moving and also very exciting. We're doing not only statistics, but also a lot of great science related to all the activities here.
Cool. And could you discuss just a little bit more specifically some of the clinical domains that you're working in, what some of the diseases, the disease types that you're working on? And I'm interested to hear more about this full clinical pipeline approach.
Yeah, so this is, as I alluded to, this is a specialized company. We're focusing on 100% immunotherapy in oncology. We cover a lot of therapeutic indications like, non-small cell lung cancer, breast cancer, urothelial, all different indications that could be challenging to immunotherapy. This space is especially exciting and challenging is because, immunotherapy, we know once the patient respond to the treatment, the response, the clinical benefit can last pretty well. But the challenge is majority of the patient, maybe 60 or 70% of patients, they don't respond this immunotherapy well. So this motivated that, we can look at the patient who do not respond to the first line immunotherapy, and then we try to identify subpopulation within the patient who do not respond well, see if we can identify a subpopulation so we can, develop a drug tailored to this specialized, this subpopulation. This is a hot topic, especially in the precision medicine era. And also, the biomarker technology has been booming in the next couple of years, which also help us to use the biomarker information to help us to identify the population that, we can target. So right now we have, again, a couple of phase 2 clinical trials. They are all focusing on the oncology therapeutic areas.
Yeah, that's really interesting. One of the things that I've noticed that as immunotherapy seems to be advancing is that, and also just the general detection and classification, better understanding of biomarkers, is that it looks like the field has gone from essentially saying we work great in one subpopulation and we don't work in others, and we're simply trying to identify which subpopulations we work well in. That now it's becoming something, and of course, this is a little bit of an outsider's view of, but that it's become something more of them saying, okay, we've now identified places where this doesn't work, and we're equipped technologically to start identifying how to help these patients. So before it was just saying, well, let's not be administering unuseful or ineffective therapies on a population for which it won't work. It's now saying, okay, we've now identified this subpopulation. Let's engineer and create the actual therapy that will work and try to advance this for a greater portion of the patients.
Yeah, there's a lot of unmet needs in this area. There are a lot of patients, if they don't respond to the first line immunotherapy well, they're struggling. So, and unfortunately, there's a large portion of the patients fall into this population. So it's very critical we can leverage the biomarker technology we have to use that molecular signature to predict their response to or the drugs we are developing. That's the major focus of our business.
Well, it's really great to have the that diversity of coverage on this show. So basically, having guests who work on all these different things. We're actually going to be doing a mini series on immunotherapy. One just covering what the technology is and what the biological mechanisms are, and then also talk about the statistical methods and data science methods that revolve around that. So maybe we'll try and we'll pop you back on for that series. I think we're going to be filming it in about 2 weeks or so, but who knows when we'll actually publish it. So yeah, it'd be great to have you back on to discuss that. So Wenting, now on to you. Could you introduce yourself, what you do, and your involvement with the Boston ASA chapter?
Sure. Hi, my name is Wenting Chen. I'm a senior biostatistician at Biogen, an American multinational biotech company based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I'm a junior level statistician working at this company because I graduated from University of Michigan Biostatistics Department 3 years ago. And I don't have too much working experience compared with Weidong, but I'm using the statistical principles and where I learned from the University of Michigan and the trainings I have at a Biogen work for the interpretation and the implementation of clinical trial development. So currently, I'm working on a phase 2 study and an open-label extension study for the disease area of multiple sclerosis. This is a disease-modifying therapy for the disease multiple sclerosis, and the indication will be multiple sclerosis, acute optic neurosis, and other associated demyelination diseases. Currently, we are still the study is ongoing, and I'm very glad to work on this study and the clinical program and use the statistical expertise and the statistical methods and modeling I learned so far to help the development of this investigational drug.
Could you just describe what this disease is, just so that people who aren't familiar with it, what is this disease? What are the symptoms? What does it entail?
The disease is called a multiple sclerosis. This kind of a disease, it's a CNS disease, and it will the progression of this kind of disease will limit the functionality of the patient from many aspects. For example, the patient they have a limitation in their walking or in their hand ability and many other aspects of their functionality respectives. So for this kind of a disease, there has been multiple drugs, but many of them are focused on the control of the disease progression. So for the drug that I'm working on, it's aiming at the improvement of the disease. It's working on the improvement of the functionality of the patients.
Great. And now maybe could both of you just very quickly, in a sentence or two, just describe to us what your involvement is with the ASA Boston chapter? Wenting first.
Sure. So currently, I'm the secretary of the American Statistical Association Boston chapter, and I'm also on the planning committee of the Boston chapter. Since at the end of 2018, I think it's my great honor to join this statistical community and to use the expertise and my time to contribute to this statistical community. So we had a lot of local activities so far, both in terms of academic presentations and also some industrial symposium and events. For example, this Boston Pharmaceutical Symposium.
So could you very quickly tell us what you do with the Boston ASA chapter and then introduce us to this pharmaceutical symposium?
Sure. Thanks, Glenn. Also, thank you, Winting, for the introduction of this chapter. So maybe I can start with a little background about, this pharmaceutical symposium. A couple of years ago, I was at a few conferences, they're all statistical conferences. I met a lot of people from Boston, a lot of statisticians. We go to Washington, D.C., we go to Seattle, we go to all different places. What struck me was I met a lot of stats of colleagues in this industry from Boston in other cities. So I was thinking, why don't we start our own community in Boston area? Because Boston is becoming a hub for biopharmaceutical, and pharmaceutical companies. There are a lot of statistical talents in this neighborhood. Why don't we form our own community? So we can have, first of all, scientific and statistical exchange of the ideas and also a social networking. So that was started maybe 3 or 4 years ago. We had a first pharmaceutical symposium at Takeda, and then that went really well. So my role since that was mostly involved in planning committee of the pharmaceutical symposium in Boston. So this year, is going to be the 4th annual pharmaceutical symposium. Every year, I want to emphasize the audience growed a lot since we started the first time 4 years ago. So this year, we're going to focus on mostly statistical innovations, because we want to get together to have, to exchange the ideas, innovations on statistics and how we're going to impact the pharmaceutical industry in this neighborhood. And also, we're lucky to have 2 senior leaders in this community as a keynote speaker. One is Dr. Sandeep Menon from Pfizer, who is the senior VP in the early clinical development, and also Dr. Anne Hetherington from Takeda, who is also a senior VP in the data science. I mean, again, we want to use this as a platform to, provide a stage for the statisticians in the Boston neighborhood so we can, learn from each other, we can meet friends so we don't have to travel to different places for this same purpose. I think that this is really beneficial to the statisticians in this neighborhood. And also, we're lucky to have this event supported ASA Boston chapter with the leadership of the chair, Dr. Olga Vitek, and we were able to do this, very effective within the ASA organization.
Yeah, I definitely know what you mean about that feeling of going to national conferences just to meet your colleagues who live in the same city as you. Given that I work in the Research Triangle Park, it seems like the North Carolina ASA chapter, for example, we have a lot of people involved, but they're mainly meeting at the national level already. So it's always nice to have something where, when everyone lives within about a 30-minute or 40-minute radius of each other, to have something a little bit more local. So you don't have to be traveling across the country or into Canada to engage in some of these ASA and the associated professional societies events. So I thought it'd be fun to talk a little bit about what are some of the major themes that will be covered in the Pharmaceutical Symposium. I've noticed that a lot of people, when they're working in the field, have a series of shared concerns and shared priorities about what they want to be working on, what type of statistical or medical problems they want to be conquering. What are some of those themes that are going to be covered in this conference?
I think for this conference, we're going to focus on statistical innovation and also especially in the statistical design and new initiatives in terms of we're going to have statisticians working in some of the new areas like, wearable device, how we're going to use those digital data to support our clinical development, in addition to classical innovative design, how all those design going to impact the clinical development. So I think this is going to be something very new to this year's conference. I think I'm very excited to have them to be able to present their work here.
I agree with Weidong's point that we have a lot of wonderful talks focused on the clinical trial development wherever the statistical principles is needed. And we have a lot of statistical innovation topics this year. And I also want to mention that as this is a fourth annual symposium, our topic is more and more innovative and more clinical trial development focused. Because previous year's symposium may have broader topic because it's like at the earlier stage of this symposium, but as we have more attendees and we start to attract more speakers, these invited talks, they really present and demonstrate a very broad aspects of the statistical innovations and its best practice in the clinical trial development. So we are very glad to have a lot of good invited speakers this year. And also, apart from this series of invited talks, we also have a poster session aiming to provide opportunities for more junior statisticians or even academic researchers if they would like to present their research and their work related to the clinical trial development. So this is another attraction of this symposium as well.
Yeah, I definitely like the idea of giving young researchers and early career professionals opportunities to shine and engage in the profession. That's how we keep things fresh and make sure that people don't fall off the radar as they develop their career. I'm a bit curious, though, about the discussion about innovative clinical trial design. So I assume that this is different types of clinical trial designing experiments that deviate from the usual randomized controlled trials and things like that. What are some of the sort of innovative or interesting design topics that are going to be discussed, and sort of what types of clinical challenges or logistic challenges are they trying to overcome?
I think from my perspective, one of the challenge is we are, right now compared to a few maybe 10 or 2 decades ago, we are trying to use more complex designs. Those complex designs really have a positive impact on the clinical trials in terms of you have the flexibility to change the study and also potentially save the cost. from the ethical perspective, also give the patient more opportunity to test the efficacious drug and also give a patient more opportunity to quit from a drug which is not efficacious. But the problem is, given the complexity of the design, there are some concerns of statistically and also from the regulatory perspective. For example, in the last couple of years, we have some issues with the estimate. Basically, if we have a different complex designs, how do we make sure we are estimating the stuff we're interested in? I mean, given the new initiative of the CID, I think that's the complex innovative design started by the FDA. I think the good thing is the community is more accepting to leverage the complex design, to make sure it works, to our benefit, but realizing this is still a little bit early stage to how to use this complex design to help us. I think there's going to be a lot of discussions, not only in this symposium, but you will hear in different places and different conferences. This is continue to be a focus in terms of how we're going to use that design, leverage the power of the design to help us to make sure we can have efficient trial. I think that's continue to be a challenge and continue to be exciting opportunities for all the statisticians.
Yeah, as sort of the clinical demands become greater on trials, because we are expecting more and more things from clinical trials these days, but also just the variety of information that we can be incorporating and try to have a more holistic view of the information that's being generated from a clinical trial. There's a lot that people want to bring to the table if possible, because why throw out information if you can have it? But of course, information doesn't come for free. But I think some people, when they hear this a priori, the idea that, changing clinical trial design or adapting according to what the data is being generated, they might think that they might become concerned because it brings up the idea that, there's this idea that, the experiment should be proposed, it should be executed, it should not be changed. And that you don't want people sort of cherry picking the data and augmenting the trial as it goes in order to try to achieve one outcome as opposed to the other. And I think that's, it's a concern as far as, in most scientific aspects, you don't change the experiment halfway through and start trying to do something else. But at the same time, the complexity of the actual clinical applications can become so great that there's a lot of bugs in the system that you can't work out a priori, or there's bugs in the systems that, when you're trying to deliver a therapy or optimize a therapy for a specific patient, that there's a lot of problems that crop up in actual from a clinical utility perspective that you can't really pinpoint and control during the trial design process. So I'm curious if you have some thoughts on that, as far as what are some of the main reasons why we're looking to essentially have more control over the clinical trial in the meantime, and how it's meant to essentially better support clinical science, not undermine clinical science by people trying to simply achieve certain clinical endpoints.
Yeah, this maybe I can talk from my perspective. Wenting, feel free to chime in. I think at this moment, if you look at the clinical development, we have a lot of data to leverage. So in general, the idea is if we have more data, we should use more information to support decision making. So that's why, especially in some of the therapeutic area, when you do not have a lot of patients you can enroll, you can test your drug, that's becoming especially important. That's also part of the complex of the design perspective. I'll give you one example in the rare disease. For example, the Duchenne muscular dystrophy. This is a rare disease. You don't have a lot of patients to test. If you have only 10 or 20 patients in your trial, you're limiting the information from this very small population. So idea is if you have historical data, historical trial ongoing, you can leverage, or why not, to use that data as part of your information. The second is sometimes when you test the drug is not very ethical to have a control arm, which you give patient placebo, and it's the same for DMD as well. I think a few companies they got the drug approved with a control arm, but they use the historical control as their reference to present to the regulatory. But there's a challenge, as you alluded to, Glenn, is when we use the external data, the question becomes the quality of the data. The second, the whether the population is comparable to the population you are testing. So that I think the regulatory in general, they are supportive to incorporate more information outside the trial, but you really need to be careful in terms of what information you are bringing into this trial, how you're going to use that information statistically to support your decision. I think but the good thing is this community is very open to that idea, especially in the rare disease area. You don't have a lot of patients you can work on. So I heard that there's one example is, again, I want to use the CID as example. With Life Science, I think that's another biotech company in Cambridge. They submitted a complex design review to the regulatory for that DMD trial using the historical information as a part of the design information. So again, I think in general, there's a trend that we can incorporate more information to support our decision, but it's challenging, especially there are statistical challenges. How are we going to maybe use that information to, if you want to discount that information, how much you want to discount, things like this. Wenting, maybe you have some thoughts on this as well?
Yeah, thanks, Weidong, for giving these great examples. I think in terms of when we have a clinical trial that we don't have a placebo arm, or when the sample size is very small, definitely there are a lot of statistical innovations about how to use external information or historical information to help make the business decision making and to help develop the strategies for the clinical program. And in terms of interpretation from a statistician perspective, that often involves the use of a Bayesian methodology, because as we know previously in the pharmaceutical industry, Bayesian principles and its modeling is not very popular. But in recent years, as we are aware that we need to use this historical information and this external information, probably from a competing drug or from some already drugs on the market, the use of Bayesian techniques and modeling are becoming more and more important when we are doing clinical development. But as Weidong pointed out, there's a lot of heterogeneity in terms of the patient population, in terms of the mechanism of the investigational drug, and in terms of study duration, all kinds of this heterogeneity between one clinical trial treatment and some other clinical drugs makes the use of this Bayesian technique or some other statistical modeling trying to leverage external information or historical information very complicated. But it's a great opportunity for statisticians to use our principles to help and to make this kind of decision based on the Bayesian modeling and other techniques we have.
There's a potential we may be able to step out of this local community to have more collaboration with external other, that's colleagues from other communities. I think that's probably one more thing we need to think about in the future. But this conference, this symposium is still young. This is only fourth year. I think that's something I'm thinking maybe we can expand our collaboration with our other communities, to invite more speakers from different chapters, maybe different organizations to, give us diversify our speakers and participants.
Yeah, so agree with Weidong. So currently we are a more local symposium attracting statisticians and researchers from the local community. But with a growing number of attendees and more attractions from both industry, statistician, and academic researchers, we definitely would like to invite more invited speakers outside of our local community. For example, for future symposium, we would like to invite people from other pharmaceutical companies that are not based in Cambridge or the greater Boston areas to bring in more innovations and more statistical principles to our symposium. At the same time, we also like to advertise our symposium to a broader community because currently the majority of the attendees are from the Boston area or the Boston chapter members. But definitely, if there are people outside of the greater Boston areas, that'd be great.
Yeah, that definitely is one of the challenges of having such a rich and large statistical community available locally. Just to reiterate, anyone outside the Boston area who wants to come and participate, be engaged in the chapter or be engaged in symposiums or conferences, definitely feel free to. It's a nice, approachable group of folks. I enjoy talking to them. I enjoy interacting with them, and you will too. And the pharmaceutical aspect isn't the only thing that the Boston chapter is doing. I think that actually about a day or so before the Pharmaceutical Symposium, there's actually another symposium or conference on proteomics, I believe. And there's quite a few events there. So if you can't make it to the Pharmaceutical Symposium, there are many other activities that the Boston chapter does. It's a very active chapter. It's a very open chapter. So if you are interested in this work, definitely get in contact and say hello and get involved.
Yeah, thank you, Glenn. I think that's another great idea. So I kind of, buried my head in the sand because we're mostly focusing on pharmaceutical statisticians here, but actually in this neighborhood, there are a lot of statisticians working in the non-pharmaceutical industry or academia as well. As you point out, proteomics, there are also great statisticians and also other like genomics, statistician working in those areas and financials as well. So, we use basically the same or similar statistical principle to support all the great business and science in different areas. I think, in the long term, we really, want to maybe have a broader community in terms of the statisticians, statistical communications across different communities and industries here.
Well, Cheng and Weidong, thanks so much for being on the show. It was great hearing about the different aspects that are going to be covered in the Pharmaceutical Symposium, covering a great range of subjects, including wearables, Bayesian analysis and Bayesian design, and also just general clinical trial design. And also, not just in the pharmaceutical area, but in biotech in general. So there are many subjects that are going to be covered at the symposium. And it'll be really fun to hear a bit more about those closer to the time. So thank you both for coming on today and look forward to talking again with you soon.
Thank you, Glenn, and thanks our audience for watching this interview. It is my great pleasure to be interviewed, and I'm looking forward to the following interviews with other clinical biostatisticians in the pharmaceutical industry.
All right. Thank you, Glenn, for having us.
Hey, folks, it's Glenn. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Pod of Asclepius. If so, please consider leaving a like, a comment, and hitting that subscribe and bell button. We're a small channel and every bit helps. If you have a department, a lab, or even just friends who would like this episode, definitely forward it along. I don't have any of those things, but if you do, you should definitely celebrate by sending them an episode. We've got plenty of episodes on healthcare topics, particularly in data science and machine learning, so check out the other episodes on the channel, or some of the playlists. You can also check out our website to join our mailing list, or see our sponsors. Thanks so much to our sponsors for their support. And while the views discussed on the show are undoubtedly scintillating, they don't necessarily represent the views of our sponsors, the speaker's employer, my views, your views, my neighbor's cat's views, your cat's views, or anyone else not saying the words. In fact, they might not even represent the speaker's views by the time you're hearing it, so be sure to subscribe in case they come back onto the show to change their mind. See what I did there? Thanks again.